Welcome to my Bhagavad Gita class and kirtan. And tonight we're going to be continuing our discussion on Nishkama Kama Yoga with Bhagavad Gita verses 251 through 53. And I'm just checking that, there we go. Just checking we're live here on Facebook, which we are. And we also need to turn on the fan. Always forget something. Okay, we're good to go. Krishna. Swarupananda Paramahansa Namine Korakaruna Swarupaya Radha Krishna Prasthayate Namo Siddha Swarupananda Paramahansa Namine Korakaruna Swarupaya Radha Krishna Prasthayate Namo Siddha Swarupananda Paramahansa Namine Korakaruna Swarupaya Radha Krishna Prasthayate Namaste Saraswati Deva Gauravani Prachari Evasesha Sunyavare Vaskachari Satarine Namaste Saraswati Deva Gauravani Pracharine Evasesha Sunyavare Vaskachari Satarine Namaste Saraswati Deva Gauravani Prachari Evasesha Sunyavadi Vaskachari Satarine Namaste Saraswati Deva Gauravani Prachari Evasesha Sunyavadi Vaskachari Satarine Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Vyasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Vyasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadara, Shri Asari Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Hare. Nityananda, Nityananda, Gauranga, Gauranga. Nityananda, Nityananda, Gauranga, Gauranga. Nityananda, Nityananda, Gauranga, Gauranga. Nityananda, Nityananda, Gauranga, Gauranga. Radha Krishna Vrindavan, 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 Radha Krishna Vrindavan. Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol. Krishna, 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 Krishna. Jaya Jaya Srila Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Gurudev, Jaya Jaya Srila Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Gurudev, Jaya Jaya Srila Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Gurudev, Jaya Jaya Srila Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Gurudev. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajaka Satar Sadashishima Jagakuru Siddhasarupananda Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajaka Satar Satashishima His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koda Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Dvaita Gadadhar, Shri Asadi Go Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Namacharya Shri Haridasa Ko Ki Jai. Nitai Ghosh World Mission Ki Jai. Navadvita Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gogopinath, Shyamakun, Radhakun, Giri Govardhani Ki Jai. Vrindavan Ki Jai, Mathuradan Ki Jai. Mayapodan Ki Jai, Ganga Mai Ki Jai, Jamuna Mai Ki Jai, Tulsi Devi Ki Jai, Bhakti Devi Ki Jai, Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to Samal devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to Samal devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to Samal devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga, Gaura Premanandi, Hare Hare Bol. Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai. Amagina Timarandasya Gina Gina Salakaya Chaksurun Militanyena Tajmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantekam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalan Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagajatam Sahagana Raganatham Vitam Tam Sajeevam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagapate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhi Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sutta Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakappa Turubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhaivacha Patitanam Pavenbhyo Vaishnavyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavrindam Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Shrimate Siddhaswarupananda Paramahansa Niti Namine Namo Siddhaswarupananda Paramahansa Namine Gura Karuna Swarupaya Radha Krishna Prastayate. For speaking first off of my respectful obeisances under the lotus feet of my spiritual master, Jagadguru Siddhaswarupananda Srila Prabhupada, who is very dear to Lord Krishna, having taken shelter at his lotus feet. Srila Prabhupada is the mercy manifestation of Lord Chaitanya, Gaura Karuna Swarupaya, and very dear to Radha and Krishna, Radha Krishna Prastayate. And now for my respectful obeisances unto all the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord, who are like wish-fulfilling trees, able to fulfill all the desires of the living entities and full of compassion upon them. Namaste, Haribol, Krishna. So we're continuing our discussion on chapter 2, Bhagavad Gita, and this sequence of verses that began at text 39 and goes through to text 53 is about Buddha Yoga, or Nishkama Kama Yoga, which is Kama Yoga without attachment to the results. And so how can one engage in Kama Yoga without attachment to the results, or engage in action without attachment to the results? Like, everyone does stuff because they want a result, right? Everybody wants the result, want the fruit or the phala of the action. And so this Nishkama Kama Yoga is built on the foundation that Krishna established in at the beginning of chapter 2 in text 11 through to something's going on here, little bugs, that Krishna established in the beginning of in the early part of chapter 2, where he established that you're not the body, that we're not the body, that never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings here, and never in the future shall we ever cease to be. And then he further expounded that as we just as we go through Kamaram, Yavanam, Jara, just as we go through boyhood to youth to old age, that similarly, as we pass through these different bodies, similarly at death, we take on another body. And he also, explained that Nahanyate Hanyamani Sari Re, that you do not die. The Dehi, the possessor of the Deha, or the Dehi is the possessor of the body, the Deha, doesn't die when the body dies. So Krishna very much established this spiritual platform, which he in text 39 called Sankhya. So the analysis of matter and spirit, through an analysis of matter and the nature of life, we can come to the conclusion that that life is not material, that life is spiritual, the Atma is spirit, and spirit soul, not this material body. That is, the soul is Sat, eternal. The Dehi, the possessor of the body, the Deha, is Sat, eternal. Whereas everything in this, in relation to the body, is Asat, or temporary, unreal. So as I've described a few times, the impersonalist says that this world is false, it's illusion, it's not unreal. That the Vaishnava, following in the footsteps of the Vaishnava acharyas, established that this world is real, but it is temporary, and thus in that sense it is false. Everything is appearing to be real and solid, like these bodies and these houses we live in and these cars we own and the children we have and the spouses we have and parents we have and so on and so forth. But these are all actually unreal. They're asat, temporary. They don't really, they really do exist, but only for a short time. Only for a short time. And then they disappear, they're gone. Just as this body, you're watching me speak, this body will be gone sooner rather than later in my case. Perhaps in your case it's later rather than sooner. But regardless whether it's sooner rather than later or later rather than sooner, it's still in terms of the eternality of the soul. It's temporary. It's like and very short, like a flash in the pan, as the saying goes. So with the foundation of this spiritual understanding that I am eternal, I don't die when this body dies. So then one is able to then act with the yoga of discernment, or Buddha yoga, right? Based on Sankhya or initial knowledge of understanding that I'm not this body. Then with that understanding, then we can act on the premise that, well, how should I act? Actually becomes the question. How should I act? Okay, once I understand I'm not this body and that I'm eternal, I don't die when this body dies. I mean, like, this is revolutionary. Of course, as devotees, we've heard this for many years, perhaps decades, perhaps our entire life. If you're a child of devotees, you've been hearing this ever since you were born. Your mother and your father have been teaching you this, and your spiritual master or Srila Prabhupada has been teaching you this. You've been hearing this. Perhaps you went to the brahmachari school and you learnt this at school, that you're not the body, you're eternal. You study the books, who am I? Picture books. Am I the hand? Am I the foot? Am I the leg? And so on, right? So you learn this from a very young age, or if you've been come to chanting at some point after birth in your life, you've been hearing this perhaps for many years or decades, right? So we become familiar with it. It becomes kind of blasé. Not that like, oh yeah, okay. But like, no, this is revolutionary. It's absolutely astounding kind of knowledge. I'm not the body. Okay, so when this body dies, I don't die, I continue to exist. And so it gives rise to the question, well, with this reality, then how am I supposed to act? How am I supposed to act in this world? What do I do? How should I behave? Should I abandon all my responsibilities and duties? Which is kind of should I become a renunciate and just go and meditate or something? And of course, most people are not ready for this. You may hear this spiritual knowledge that you're not the body, but you're not self-realized. You're not able to go and go into some cave somewhere and meditate. So in in chapter 3, Arjuna basically asks this. He's confused by Krishna's instructions, and he doesn't know what he should do. And he basically asks, should I renounce everything, or I'd like to renounce everything. And Krishna tells him, no, you would be a pretender. That would be pretending. It would be false. To go and sit in a cave and live as a renunciate while you're attached to sense gratification is just false renunciation, because what are you doing? This example comes up a lot with neophyte devotees or kanistha adhikaris who are wanting to impress others with how advanced spiritually they are. So they want to chant japa, they want to imitate Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur and just chant japa all day. And this is discouraged, because while you're chanting japa, if all you're thinking about is having sex or thinking about members of the opposite sex, then this is just pretending. So this is not recommended. So how am I supposed? So I'm not supposed to be a renunciate, or certainly at least not until a stage in life, close to, in late old age, or if I become actually self-realized, that then I can become a renunciate. But in the meantime, no, it's just pretense, fake spirituality, trying to impress others with how advanced we are. And so then how should I act? What should I do? And so Krishna then explains, no, you should perform your duty. Perform your duty. In other words, do what your duty is. Take your duty very seriously, like super seriously. Perform your duty, but without attachment to the results. Akama phala. So don't be attached to the results of your activities. So this in essence is, what karma yoga is. It's based on the understanding that I'm spiritual in essence. And then so how should I act? I should act without attachment to the results. I should perform my duty equipoised. And without attachment to the results, and understanding that I'm not the creator of the results. This is text 47. That I'm not the creator of the results. That I perform my duty, and the results come or may not come. I'm not responsible for that. I do my best. I perform my duty, and and then Krishna then said that this acting in equanimity or sama is yoga. So Krishna said here in text samatvam yoga uchite. So yogastha kurukamani sangam tyaktva Dhananjaya Sijya Sijyo Samobhutva Samatvam Yoga Uchite. Perform your duty equipoised. O Arjuna, Dhananjaya, conqueror of wealth, abandoning all attachment to success or failure. Sijya Sijyo. Such equanimity is called yoga. So this is actually yoga. Acting on this understanding without attachment to the results. Such equanimity is called yoga. And then buddhi, the text we studied last week, buddhi yukto jahatiha ube sukrita daskriti tajmad yoga yayujasva yoga kama shukaljalam. A man engaged in buddhi yoga, or devotional service, rids himself of both good and bad actions. Sukrita daskriti. And therefore strive for yoga, which is the art of all work. Tajman yoga yayujaswa yoga kama shukaljalam. So this yoga is the art or the skill of work. And so moving on here, text 51. Kamajam buddhi yukta hi phalam tyaktva manisinaha janma bandha vinir muktaha param gacchantya namayam. By thus engaging in devotional service to the Lord, great sages or devotees, the manisinaha, free themselves from the results of work in the material world. Phalam tyaktva. So phalam, the fruit, and tyakta, become freed from. In this way, they become free from the cycle of birth and death. Janma bandha vinir muktaha. Mukta, liberation. So liberation from this janma bandha. So, we are tied to this material world, the cycle of birth and death, and attain the state beyond all miseries by going back to Godhead. Padam gacchantya namayam. Namayam is blissful experience of blissfulness. Or anamayam, without miseries, how it is translated here. So without miseries. So Vaikuntha is known as the place of no anxieties or no misery, Vaikuntha. So here, by thus engaging in devotional service to the Lord, great sages or devotees free themselves from the results of work in the material world. So the results of work, they bind us to this world. This attachment to the results of our activities binds us to the world. So, if we don't have the spiritual foundation, in other words, the foundation of, that Krishna established in the beginning of Bhagavad Gita in chapters 2, text 11 through 30 or 31, something like that. So Krishna establishes the spiritual foundation. And on that foundation, then one can act without attachment to the fruits. Because we can understand, I'm temporary. I'm only here for however many years, whatever it may be. There's been quite a few articles on the news lately about how the average lifetime has greatly increased in this in the 20th century and this century, where now, people are living to be much older, whereas the average age used to be, 40, right, something like that, 40 to 50. So people were dying from all kinds of diseases at much younger ages, whereas now, even though people's diets are generally so abominable, they're living much longer due to advancements in medicine. And so not sure why I got into that. Anyway, so we're living, right, and living longer. But if we don't have the spiritual understanding, then there's no way we can act without attachment to the results. Unless we're just like a person who's depressed. So sometimes you get people who are just so depressed they just don't care about anything. They're just depressed and moping around and don't care, don't have any interest in life. But if you're not suffering from that kind of dejection or depression, then, and you don't have any kind of spiritual understanding, then of course you're going to act with attachment to the results. Why does anybody do anything? We only do stuff because we want to get the result. Why do we go to work? Why does anyone go to work? Well, it's because I want money. I want the fruit, right? So I'm called a kami, a fruitive actor. And Because in the ISKCON society in the early days, I don't know what it's like now, but it used to be that the term kami was used as a great insult or term of derision. And, so, but actually the term kami, it actually refers to people who are following the Vedic processes of sacrifices and so on, so that they can become elevated to the heavenly planets. This is actually a kami. So a person who's not following the Vedic injunctions and the prescriptions and rituals and so on for elevation of the heavenly planets, then such a person, they're not even a kami, they're just below a kami, right? But anyway, the term kami sort of stuck. But, but essentially, anyone who's doing anything, they're only doing it because they want the fruit, the phalam. They're doing what they're doing because they want to enjoy the result. Like, why do I go to work? Because I want the money. I mean, of course, it's a little bit interesting. When people work, so initially they, when in the past when I was younger, I've actually been doing what I'm doing here in Hawaii for 30 years. The years go by, the decades roll by, doing the same thing, work in the same company, but which is very unusual. But in the past, I was unemployed. At one time, I came to Hawaii to assist or try to assist Srila Prabhupada with his projects here. Tustra actually had me come here, so invited me to come, and then I just came for a few weeks, and then Tustra and Srila Prabhupada wanted me to come back to implement what I'd recommended, so I came back, and in the course of that, I ended up going to the mainland with Srila Prabhupada, and then came back to Hawaii, and then went back to Australia, and then I was unemployed. I had to find a job, and this is very depressing. Finding a job is a very depressing thing. You get so much rejection. You have to put all this energy into preparing resumes, and then you have to send the resumes to prospective employers, and then you never hear back from them. Or maybe you do get a phone call, and then you don't hear back from that, or maybe you even have an interview, but you don't hear back after the interview. So this becomes very depressing. One becomes dejected, and of course then you get in financial difficulty. So so at that point it's I just want money. I want the job. I need money, right? So money becomes very important. And then once you get into the job and do it for a while, well, then money becomes less important. Then it becomes more about, well, do I like the job, or do I like the people I'm working with? So the money recedes. But ultimately, regardless, if you weren't getting paid, you wouldn't do it, right? And so ultimately, anyone who's working in a job to earn money is doing it because they want to enjoy the fruit. And so this is why anyone essentially pretty much does anything. And so we're fruitive workers in that sense. We're working out of attachment to the fruit. But so Krishna is saying in these verses that we should work without attachment to the fruit. We should perform our duty. So of course, so why do we work? Well, we have a duty, right? If we're a householder, well, we have a duty to our family. We have to earn a certain amount of income to enable them to be in a secure living situation where they get enough food to eat and have a place to live, right? So that becomes our duty. And of course, a devotee, of course, is serving their spiritual master, and we have a duty to serve our spiritual master, but this is not a duty as much in the sense of a duty that Krishna is talking about here in the Varnashram system. Our duty to serve our spiritual master comes from chapter 18, text 66, to just surrender under Krishna, where Krishna says, Savadaman Purityaja, abandon all varieties of dharma or religion, and Mahamekam Saranam Braja, and just surrender unto me, one-pointedly just surrender unto me. So similarly, the service to our spiritual master should be in that basis, like abandonment of any kind of sense of mundane duty or religiosity, such as the responsibility to maintain a family, and to just render service to Krishna. And how do we serve Krishna? By serving our spiritual master. This is non-different. But so with the spiritual understanding that I'm not this body, then I can have the understanding that that I can work without attachment to the fruits, and without attachment to success or failure. And so having this understanding, this knowledge, and actually having it so that we're engaged in yoga, this acting in equanimity without attachment to the results or without it being equal in happiness or distress. And then this becomes yoga, or the art of all work, as Krishna calls it. So based on the spiritual foundation, and then being able to work like this, in this, without attachment to the results, without attachment to the fruit, or success or failure, then this becomes like a platform, a platform of knowledge. We can actually realize, by acting in this way, we can actually attain spiritual knowledge of who I am as spirit soul. So this becomes like a way to develop spiritual understanding. So we have, in other words, we have theoretical knowledge, right? So we receive theoretical knowledge that I'm not this body, but then I have to act on it. So the way to act upon this theoretical knowledge is to act without attachment to the fruits, as Krishna has been describing this whole sequence of verses. And in fact, in chapter 3, chapter 4, and chapter 5, Krishna speaks at length about this, and then also in chapter 18, where Krishna speaks about this karma yoga and the responsibility to perform our duties, and to do so without attachment, and being equal in happiness and distress. So this is so very important to appreciate and understand what Krishna is saying here. But of course we have to see it in the context always of that chapter 18, text 66 is the conclusion of Bhagavad Gita. Just surrender unto Krishna. So this kind of nishkama karma yoga that Krishna is describing here, this is a process to bring us to the point of surrender to Krishna, of Savadaman Purityaja Mamikam Saranam Braja. This is all a process to bring us to that point. So of course, we should just come to that point by hearing about it, right? We can understand it. This is very much the way that Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada did his translation of Bhagavad Gita. As I've said, he's everything he's translating and all his commentaries and purports are all with the conclusion of Bhagavad Gita in mind. And of course, our spiritual master Srila Prabhupada is always just engaging us in devotional service, in projects. Just work for me, assist. Like Prabhupada's instruction is assist him in some way, work on one of his projects, or assist his disciples, in doing his projects. This is what we should be doing. And why are we doing this? Because this is the conclusion of Bhagavad Gita. Just surrender unto Krishna. Serve the spiritual master. Or in chapter 4, text 34, Tadvidi pranipatena pariprasnena sevaya. So just, if you want to know the truth, approach a bona fide spiritual master and inquire submissively and render service, sevaya, unto him. Right? So this is Krishna's instruction in Bhagavad Gita. Render service to the spiritual master and just surrender unto him one-pointedly. Surrender to Krishna one-pointedly. And when it does this by seeking out and finding the bona fide spiritual master whom I can give my life to and render service to. So in this text 51, Krishna says, by thus engaging in devotional service, Buddhi Yoga, the yoga of discernment, by thus engaging in devotional service to the Lord, great sages or devotees free themselves from the results of work in the material world. So, working without attachment to the fruits frees you from the results of work. In this way, they become free from the cycle of birth and death. So this attachment to the results of work is what actually binds us to this world. We become bound to this world. And by being bound to this world, that commits us to the samsara, the process of birth and death, the wheel of birth and death, and attain this state beyond all miseries by going back to Godhead. So text 52. When your intelligence has passed out of the dense forest of delusion, you shall become indifferent to all that has been heard and all that is to be heard. So this, all that has been heard and all that is to be heard, this is referring to the the Vedic processes and rituals for attaining fruits, elevation to the spiritual planets, or for gaining material benedictions in this particular life, or perhaps in future lives. So all that has been heard and all that is to be heard is referring to material knowledge, mundane knowledge. Right? So when your intelligence, when your buddhi has passed out of the dense forest of delusion, so mahakalila, moha is illusion. When your intelligence has passed out of this, you shall become indifferent to all that has been heard and all that is to be heard. So we should be indifferent to mundane religiosity. And but this verse is not saying be indifferent to transcendental knowledge. So this doesn't mean, so I shouldn't study Bhagavad Gita then. Krishna is saying be indifferent to everything. No. Be indifferent to all kinds of mundane knowledge and mundane learning and listening to all this mundane stuff. In fact, we're just surrounded in a world of material sound vibration. Discussions with others and reading newspapers and watching TV and movies and listening to the radio and this, that, and the other. All this material sound vibration. So we should be indifferent to it, to everything that is to be heard and everything that is to be heard. All this material sound vibration. We should be completely indifferent to it and uninfluenced by it. Because listening to material sound vibration is like connecting us and tying us to this world. It's engaging our thoughts in material activity, in this material world. And this binds us to this world. So if through the process of Sankhya, of understanding from Krishna the distinction between the body and the soul, and then learning how to act on that spiritual understanding, to act in nishkama karma yoga or buddhi yoga without attachment to the fruits, to act in equanimity and in success or failure, to be acting in this way is actually yoga. So acting like that, acting in that way, then we can become indifferent to everything that is to be heard about this material world. So we develop indifference to it. Then Krishna says in text 53, when your mind is no longer disturbed by the flowery language of the Vedas, and when it remains fixed in the trance of self-realization, so this was samadhi, then you will have attained the divine consciousness. So this divine consciousness is actually yoga. So this tada yoga avidyasi, tada yoga avapshyasi. So you will achieve yoga. So this is yoga, when your mind is no longer disturbed by the flowery language of the Vedas. So, the flowery language, of course, in Vedic society, the Vedas are like everything, so following the Vedas. But, in our situation, it's like, it's mundane, it's religiosity, or it's just material sound vibration. So when our mind is no longer disturbed by desire for the fruits, in other words, I was in a situation recently where talking to someone and their siblings have somehow or other been able to buy houses, to acquire houses, and this person is unable to buy a house, and financially for whatever reasons, and they were feeling very sort of like inferior as a result of this, feeling that they would be socially inferior to these other people, their siblings, who somehow or other have been able to acquire a house. And so this is this is like being disturbed. So he's disturbed, he's worried, I'm going to meet with them, and they've got houses and I don't, and they might think they're superior to me, and so there's basically feeling lower in comparison to these other people who have a better material situation. So this is an example of being disturbed by the flowery language of the Vedas, so to speak, by being disturbed by material assets or material things. If I don't have it, I feel unworthy, so I'm disturbed. I don't feel good about myself. I'm aspiring that I have this goal to achieve this thing, and if I don't achieve it, then I feel all unworthy. So when I'm not disturbed by material goals, whereas when I'm fine one way or the other, with it or without it. If it comes, great. If it doesn't come, okay, that's fine too. So when my mind is no longer disturbed, because I have a spiritual understanding that I'm not this body, that I'm Atma, spirit, soul, and I'm working with detachment, not attached to the fruits. I'm equal in happiness and distress, or success or failure, and become indifferent to whatever there is to be heard in this material world. And so when I'm in that situation, and I'm no longer disturbed by material things, and when I'm able to remain fixed in self-determination, or keep my mind is undisturbed, that the word is achala, unflinching, buddhi, intelligence. samadha vachala buddhi. So I'm in samadhi, fixed concentration, achala. It's not flickering, moving all around. Buddhi, my intelligence. So when my mind and intelligence is fixed like this, then actually this is yoga or self-realization. Then you will have attained the divine consciousness. So this finishes this sequence of verses that started at text 39 and went through to text 54. And then in text 54, Arjuna asks, oh, so what is the person like who's in this consciousness of samadhi, in this yoga, who is self-realized? How do they sit? How do they speak? How do they act? Do they get what happens when disturbing things happen? How do they act in response to disturbances? And so then there's quite a long sequence of verses. In fact, actually, it goes pretty much through to the end of the chapter, where Krishna describes how a person acts once they're in this condition. And so we'll pick it up there not next week. Next week, of course, is Srila Prabhupada's appearance day on Monday, June 14th. And I don't know what anyone is doing, but I thought we would still have a Bhagavad Gita class, but the Bhagavad, unless there's some other gathering happening or something like that, but otherwise I'll just be here next Monday at 7 p.m. Hawaii time, and we will I thought I would talk about Bhagavad Gita in the context of accepting a spiritual master and the importance of the spiritual master, and in that way attempt to glorify my spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada. So please, if you like, join me next week for that, and also actually at 6 p.m. on the 14th, I'll be giving a Yoga Kirtan Hawaii talk about the importance of accepting a spiritual master, and so that's a public lecture. And actually on the Sunday night at 7 p.m. Hawaii time, I'll be speaking in congregational kirtan, so chanting a bit and then speaking there. So anyway, so you're welcome to join me for those programs if you like. So we'll just have a short little conclusion chant, just for a few minutes. So thank you very much for joining me. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to share Bhagavad Gita with you. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Haribo, Namaste. Krishna Krishna. Thanks very much for joining me.